that project or an application needs to follow, that AI needs to be used at this part of place. Like this is the place where AI needs to be used. So before that, the data has to be clean, or is there any checklist like that that you can suggest?
I mean, the checklist has to be created internally only, right? I mean, somebody who has an understanding of the product, somebody who has an understanding of what domain it is collecting data from, right? So imagine there is a field called gender, and suddenly you have a field value saying ABC. Of course, that's an incorrect one. So there is again no magic wand to it, right? Which is why it's a hard piece, which is why it is often the most underrated task. But somebody has to do all of that, right? This is very similar to if you're cooking, right? Somebody has to shift through the entire rice. So,
all right.
So,
there is one more question, but for now we're constrained on time. You can find Mr. Anuj here through the day. And come on, guys, put your hand. Truly driving so much knowledge and change in the AI space. Thank you so much, Mr. Anuj. All right. Also, guys, just a quick reminder, the LinkedIn contest is on. You all might be wondering what exactly to post. Anything, any of your experiences, any of your learnings, any insights that you have. Also, Mr. Anuj, we'll just have a team help you with the mic. All right. How are you guys doing so far? Is the power go good? All right. Now I need to hear it from your voice. So I'm going to do a small vocal exercise. Just. All right. Now we're going to go super low. 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 All right, good job, guys. All right, everybody clap once. No. I like the enthusiasm. Clap once. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. All right, awesome. Everyone touch your nose. Touch your ears. See? All right, that's good enough attention right now. All right, calling upon stage, we have the next speaker with us. Before that, all right, ladies and gentlemen, the next topic of discussion is going to be practices to strengthen data observability. The speaker is Mr. Snehit Alamraju. Come on, put your hands together for Mr. Snehit. Mr. Snehit is a senior manager of data and analytics at Envista. He will share his insights on strengthening data observability. Snehit has over 15 years of experience in architecting, designing, and managing data programs. He actively contributes to the data community and is involved in organizing various data-related meetups right here in Hyderabad. Come on, guys. So he does a lot to contribute for the data community within Hyderabad. Mr. Snehit, let's just quickly check your microphone.
Check.
Perfect. And your...
Good afternoon, everyone. All right, just give me 1 second here. Okay. Thank you for joining today. I am Snehit Alamraju. I have been working in the company called Envista, which is a dental platform. So any of the products that you would find in a dentist's office, like implants, abutments, or whatever, chairs, right? So we have as part of our manufacturing portfolio. So I work in the data and analytics division there as taking care of IoT and advanced analytics. So I typically like to be at the confluence of data, strategy, and community. So I'm an avid cyclist and runner. My most favorite achievement for this year so far is that I have cycled like 370 kilometers in 24 hours. So the plan is to go for 400. So let's see how that goes. But anyways, what I'm here today to talk about. So before I get started, with a raise of hands, how many of you here are pure on the engineering data engineers, who get their hands dirty with the data on the system side? Okay, perfect. So that's around 40 to 50%. How many of you are analysts, who work with, say, business stakeholders, use the data and, generate some insights? Around 20% of it. So that, how many of you are on the leadership side of things? You own the systems. So yeah, not many leaders. So that's good. So I'm here today to talk about more of the bare bones of observability, of data observability, right? So let's talk about 5 specific scenarios, and what I would like to interlace them with is the data observability practices that you can put in practice. So let's take scenario 1, and again I'm sure these are scenarios that some of us or most of us would have encountered or encounter as a part of our day-to-day journey. So the first thing, of course, is pipeline failures from ERP. Again, these are practical examples from our company or in companies that I have worked for that I have put here. So there are pipeline failures from our source. The source can be ERP or CRM or whatever that is, and there are delays getting data to the consumers or to the end users, right? So this is a typical failure scenario. The second scenario is on the engineering side, people who are DBAs or people who are managing your cloud instances. There is temp space filling up on the servers, which results in throttle jobs. Then again, that results in delays in getting the data to your stakeholders. There is reduced data quality, which results in missing data or incomplete data in, say, management reporting, for example, right? So all of them are related to, at the end of the day, how the data is consumed or used, right? So Shiv talked about how ultimately we need to join it back to the business context, right? So ultimately, how the data is consumed and how it impacts decision making or the data consumers is what these scenarios impact. Fourth scenario is reporting tools like Power BI or Tableau, and people always buy licenses. They do not come at cheap, right? But there are ways where people are not even using them, right? So there is a cost associated with that as well, and that also is part of what companies struggle with. They are just paying for something that people are not using, right? Then of course on the cloud side, right, there are escalating cloud costs on a specific project, right? How do you make sure that and if you are, for example, if you are working in a hybrid cloud scenario, for instance, right? How do you make sure that you are tracking your costs, making sure that the costs are going to the right instances, and making sure that you are shutting down things that are not needed, or there is one place where you can capture all of those details, right? So those are 5 specific scenarios. Ultimately, what they all boil down to is there is an inconsistent pipeline performance, whether when we are talking it from data engineering side. There is data unavailable in a timely fashion to our consumers, and most of the times we are always in a firefighting mode, right? We are always trying to put out fires, working weekends, working long hours. So it's a pain, and we feel it. Most companies feel it as well. So I think that's where at least for me, the bare bones data observability comes in, right? There you might call it. Some people might call it monitoring to some extent, but I think monitoring is just showing what is happening. But what are you doing to remediate whatever is coming out of the monitoring is, for me, what data observability is about. So let's focus on 3 specific terms here, which I would like you to focus on. The first thing is So observability provides a continuous, holistic, and cross-sectional visibility, right? So the important term there is the continuous part. So it's not a one-time thing that we just set it up and it keeps running, right? So there has to be, even if it is automated to whatever extent you have, there is some human intervention and someone to own it up and make sure that there is action being taken continuously, right? So there is cross-sectional visibility. So you have your data landscape, you have your data systems, and there are signals that are coming through from an infrastructure standpoint, from an application standpoint. You can have different planes or data layers, that you can talk about, right? So how do you capture those signals, and how do you get visibility for those in a continuous manner, and then ultimately have a comprehensive understanding of each of those components. If you want to go down to the level of detail of the individual component itself, you should be able to do that, but also have in a holistic overview of how your systems are performing at an aggregated level, right? So ultimately, it's all about getting an overall system performance, observing your data landscape at a higher level, but if required, going down to the individual, whether the application, whether the layer, or whether the individual job itself, if required, right? So I think that is data observability. Data ops observability is part of data observability, based on how I understand it as well. So why is it important, right? So data observability, it gives you information on what is going wrong, why is it going wrong, or at least that's the idea behind it, right? So what went wrong, why did it happen, what are the possible impacts associated with that failure, and then ideally, the new age data observability practices, we will give you some kind of a recommendation around remediation. So how do you remediate that, and how do you prevent it from happening in the future, right? So there is a recommendation on how do you remediate what failed or what is wrong today, and how can you prevent it in the future. So ideally, it covers the past state, present state, and the future state as well. So that is data observability from a timeline perspective. So that's why I think it is important for any data team to incorporate observability as a part of their practices. Again, it's an emerging trend. There's the Gartner hype cycle from 2022. We see data observability right in the innovation trigger. And I think it's probably kind of gone up a little bit in the last 1 year or so. But I think that there is a lot to be done, not on the vendors or the tools perspective, but from the company's perspective to adopt data observability practices, right? So what are the different building blocks? So when you look up literature on data observability, there are probably few terms that show up. The first thing, of course, is how do you profile the data? How do you have lineage on the data? How do you monitor what are the different data systems that you have? How do you actively look at your metadata, right? Your active metadata typically would tell you the unknowns, right? So it helps you monitor the unknowns. Then, of course, there is a data science and machine learning aspect, the AI aspect that Anuj and Shivna talked about, as to how do you automate that? How do you put in artificial intelligence practices or machine learning models around the data that is being collected, right? So again, on a bare bone scale, right? You might have things like counts or accumulators, for example, right? So it can be as simple as pipeline is broken, that it is supposed to load only incremental data, but it's kind of loading the full data on a daily basis, right? So there can be abnormal volumes of data, so data volumes increases. So there is decrease in terms of the behavior or the performance of your pipelines. What ran 20 minutes 1 week ago, is probably running 1 hour today, right? How do you set that baseline and how do you monitor against that, right? So there are always changes that are happening in the data pipeline perspective, right? So volume can also refer to the completeness of data, right? Is it complete to the sense, is there garbage data that is coming through? How do you make sure that you're identifying that and making sure that you're getting rid of it if it is impacting your pipelines per se, right? So time taken again is again a very important factor, because again remember we talked about the scenario of delay in getting the data to the end consumer. So what do you watch out for when you're monitoring your data flows? Abnormal data volumes, your breakdowns in terms of the list of lineage or the systems that are connected to, from a pipeline standpoint or from a job standpoint, how do you have checks and balances at every individual level, to make sure that you have the volumes coming through. And then of course there are costs associated with pipelines breakdowns as well, right? So if a pipeline breaks down, it's not just the cost associated with rerunning that pipeline, but also the hidden cost associated with that data not getting to the consumer. So the business context, remember we always tie it back to the business context. So what did we do in terms of our scenario, right? So I think this is what we are a smaller company, we are a smaller team of 18 to 20 people, small from a relative standpoint. And what did we do is, we built in our own observability, deck, right? So that we typically, monitor or talk through in our daily stand-ups, for instance. So we look at, different. So again, we have an Oracle-based system. We have Snowflake. We have different components. But so what we do, for example, is, are there any long-running jobs? When we look at it every morning, right? Again, this is more reactive than proactive. It's not real time, but it still is helpful than doing nothing, right? So we look at, what are your long-running jobs? You have different sessions associated. We have a baseline for each of the individual jobs. So, right, for example, there are cron processes that run, or there are Oracle Data Integrator jobs that run. So here, if you can see, anything that is in orange is basically running beyond your baseline. So the baseline, we basically look at, okay, the last 6 months or the 3 months, how has that job run? You baseline that on an average runtime, and in the last run, has it moved beyond that specific baseline? So this typically helps us to understand what is running on time, what is running late, because if you do not have the data on time in your data warehouse, it doesn't flow into your reporting solution, which is Tableau that we use, right? And then we kind of expect that, okay, there is barrage of emails or tickets around, we don't have the data that we see in the ERP side, for instance, right? So pipeline failures, so the way we do it is, we basically look at the metadata. Snowflake has no site, no pipe failures or run times as well, right? So we look at it both from a pipeline standpoint. Practice number 2, monitor your data resources. So this is more on the infrastructure side. So again, kind of related to the data engineering practice at your firm as well. So you observe your data infrastructure. So you have some kind of governance associated with it. Your DBS can typically look at your on-prem resources, and they typically can add more resources if required, right? Or tell you, hey, your job is taking too much of space, or too much of temp space, for instance, right? So they can do that for you, or you can have your own internal team do it. But on the cloud side, for instance, right, how it's a lot more difficult, because beyond the space or beyond the resource itself, there is a cost associated with that as well. If your scaling is in such a way that you're not even utilizing 20% of your compute, but you're paying for that, there is a cost element to that, right? So you would ideally like to prevent long idle times for your cluster. You would probably want to implement like a partition strategy to improve your read performance, for instance. So logs and metrics around resource consumption, right? So you have, compute, you have your performance. Is there any network latency? The storage and space aspects of it. We talked about the temp space earlier, right? Hardware resources, again, typically, do you want to add more hardware if it is an on-prem resource versus do you want to add more compute or scale your compute if it is a cloud-based resource, right? So improper, compute sizing or, network latency, are some things that you would typically want to watch out for in your data resources or on the infrastructure side of things. Coming back to our scenario, right? So there is a temp space, that gets filled up. And again, what you're seeing here is a more ideal case scenario, but usually you would see some spikes here, especially when there is a long-running job or jobs that take more of the temp space. So again, these are all individual jobs, what machine they are running on, what's the time taken. So again, these are baselines wherein we have like an average temp space, we have a caution level, and then we have, if it goes beyond the caution level, then what, right? So typical data observability tools might send you an alert saying that, hey, beyond, if it crosses that caution level, hey, the temp space is above 80% or above 90%, right? So we have that mechanism to get an email, to get an alert on our inboxes if it moves beyond the caution level. But, this is something that we track to make sure that do we request for more resources or, do we expand our temp space because, there is a new project that is coming through, right, which might require additional resources. Then the third practice is around the data quality itself, right? So how do you monitor your data to make sure that, it is usable? So this kind of lies on the edge of, both the data engineering side of things as well as the analyst side of things, right? Because if you are an analyst creating a dashboard or a report, you would ideally want to make sure that the data that you are using is nice. And if you are on the engineering side, ideally you would want to make sure that the data that you are providing is complete or that you are getting is complete, right? So poor data quality can, not only make it difficult for companies to understand what the consumers want, but it can end up being like a guessing game but it doesn't have to be, right? So there are different aspects, that data quality can talk about, whether it is, the validity, is this data valid anymore, right? So we typically talk about archived data, right? What was valid 5 years ago, is it still valid now, right? Do we still keep it or do you move ahead with it? So typically, customer addresses, for example, is something that, is it valid? Is it old data? Do we make sure that we are just keeping the newer data and discarding the old one, right? Then of course, there is completeness. So completeness is, all the critical fields in a record need to be filled out, right? Otherwise, that record might not be able to even match. So for instance, if there is a customer address, a zip code might be something that is really required, right? If it is missing, then of course it is treated as an incomplete record. And typically, completeness is measured as percentage of records that are missing the critical fields as opposed to the total number of records, right? So then we have, accuracy, right? How accurate is your data? It can be from error standpoint, right? So for example, if a customer entered address, right? So if your input source is getting data that is not in that standardized format, it's quite possible that it might not even be accurate, right? So you want to make sure that you are comparing it against, some kind of standard to ensure that that quality is right. Then of course, the timeliness of data, we talked about, has it aged in the database level? We talk about consistency. So for instance, you might be getting data from multiple sources, right? It can be from ERP, it can be from an external data. Take the address example itself, right? So say, for example, one of the address for a specific customer has CIRCLE, I don't know, right? Because it's a short form for circle, right? So how do you make sure that it is consistent, and how are you measuring that consistency to make sure that it is the same record? If you want to match it out in your master data management system, for example, you have to make sure that that consistency is maintained. And then last, of course, there is uniqueness. You tracks for duplicate data. You don't want to have duplicate data because it can skew your results as well. So data quality, again, is a very important pillar of observability. And I'll be very honest with you, we don't really track much of data quality on our data systems. We ideally should be doing that. But one thing that we definitely do is monitor our customer data, because we track or we collect doctors or DSOs information across the US and the world, because they are our primary customers of dental practices, basically, right? So we want to ensure that whatever we are capturing from a customer data is good in terms of quality. So our master data management tool, for instance, it provides a way to identify system. So should we be doing this on the transactional level as well? Definitely yes. It is a required thing, but we don't do it. We have not been doing that, and that's a gap, right? And I'll be very honest in admitting that I think most of our teams do have gaps, right? So I think we need to be able to accept that. Then, of course, monitor your consumers. I think this is one aspect that not many data observability tools talk about, but I think it is also important because there is a cost implication to that as well. So make sure that you're capturing users' metadata. And you can capture it within the framework of, say, your guidelines around countries, right? So some European countries might have guidelines like GDPR, which do not allow you to collect or let go of user data if they chose not to share that information with you. But within that framework itself, you can still collect metadata and analyze that, right? So what we do, for example, we have Tableau as one of our visualization tools, and Tableau licenses are not cheap. So we always get requests, I need access to Tableau. And the creator license can just be around, I don't know, $1,000 a year, right? So it can quickly escalate if you have too many users and not many users using it, right? So do watch out for disengaged or inactive users, because that can help you drive the cost down but still be more efficient in terms of understanding your user base. So we typically also have this community of practice. Imagine that like a network graph wherein we know that these are our active users, but these are the users that consume information from these active users, right? So it's more like a network graph. So we kind of do that analysis as well to understand who are our more active users. There can also be orphan data sources. How many of you have tables or data sources that you have set up in the past, but they have not been used for, I don't know, 2 years? You have a pipeline failing every day. No one cares about it. Someone somewhere comes in when someone leaves in the company and says, I think I have this data source, but I don't see data for the last 2 years. Yeah. Who is owning that data source, right? So you have to make sure that there is ownership. So there are orphan data sources. Identify those and make sure that if there is cost associated with keeping them updated, make sure that you are having that discussion. Again, this is something that we put in place purely around our licensing scenario, because we want to look at when users leave, Tableau doesn't have the capability, for example, to let them go out of the system, right? So they are still considered as a license. So it takes for someone to go in, make sure that they are monitoring the users, make sure that they are checking when was the last time someone logged in or used or published or logged into the system, and then have a conversation with them or their managers that are they still needed? Do you need some additional training? Then that becomes more of a user engagement, right? So along with monitoring your users or your consumers, you're also making sure that you're keeping your environment clean. And the last one, of course, is the costs. It all boils down to the costs in the end, right? So incorporate FinOps capabilities, and this is probably something that I'll probably spend some more time on, because we are on the process of moving to the cloud as well. And again, right now we have a hybrid cloud scenario where we have both Azure and Snowflake. And as you all know, Azure has their own cost dashboard, Snowflake has their own cost dashboard. There's no one place where we can look at them together, right? And as a part of one of our projects, wherein we were building an IoT-based data product for our end consumers, we had a scenario wherein we had budgeted for certain amount of costs, include across both of our cloud environments, Azure and Snowflake. And we did see that there were huge spikes, 300% spikes in terms of the usage. And really, that's when we digged into the cost-specific element around cloud, because again, we are learning as well on the go. And we kind of realized that, yeah, there should be some observability around cloud costs as well, right? So make sure that you are controlling your ongoing usage to derive maximum ROI. If there are data sources that you are, or data sets that you're loading that take a lot of time and cost, but there's no value in adding them, shut them down. Gain visibility by resource. We would ideally love to have it of ways. I think you all might be knowing, you can tag your individual resources to track or identify the costs, or you can also use reserved instances, wherein you can have reserved instances so that you're paying upfront. It's more like a prepaid SIM card. You pay upfront at a discounted cost, and then you can utilize that, right? So watch out for charges related to overconsumption of resources. Make sure that unused or unoptimized resources you're keeping an eye on, and make sure that you're not running into compliance or regulatory fines, because that can really tear you down. So one thing that is really important is prioritize your spend based on the business value add, right? If there is no value add to adding a data set to the business, then you might not as well spend that. You might spend cost on something that is more useful. So this is the spike that I was talking about, right? So what we did again was we set up our own schema wherein we kind of plugged in the Azure costs and the Snowflake costs together as one source, so that we can look at both of them together, right? And so we were basically working with a vendor for that IoT solution that we were talking about, and this kind of helped us to have the conversation with them and talk about, hey, what's happening here, right? So again, can anyone guess? Let me tell you my tech stack, right? So we use Databricks, we use Tableau, we use Azure Data Lake. Those are the three primary components of that IoT data pipeline. Can anyone guess what this spike might be created by? Rough, wild guess. It's actually Databricks computes that basically drove this cost up, right? So then we had the conversation. We made sure that we applied tags. We make sure that the schedule. So there is an all-purpose. I don't want to get into the technical details, but there's an all-purpose compute versus dedicated compute. We wanted to make sure that we change that strategy. So it all boils down to the cost as well. So again, typical features that you would want to look for in vendors. There are again different vendors. Unravel, of course, being one of the primary ones who started it. Make sure that you have integration across your entire tool sets. That's something that will help you. It can have a data catalog embedded as a part of it. Even if it doesn't have it, it's okay. Make sure that there is profiling or analysis for anomaly or outlier detection. If it has AI/ML driven outage analysis over historical data, that's good. It can be model driven. Definitely one of the bread and butter of an observability solution is setting up rules and alerts. This can happen at individual point solutions as well, but you should be able to monitor drift across the multiple planes that you have, whether it's a data plane or an infrastructure plane or an application plane. Then of course, persona-based features, right? What an engineering team might want to look at versus what an analyst team looks at can be completely different. So see if that's something that the vendors provide. Again, this is my last slide. What is the call to action? If you have to take away one thing from the scenarios that we talked about today and how different data observability practices, again, bare bones, linked to that is, identify the problems that you're trying to solve first, right? The tools can come later. You have to identify what is it that you're trying to solve. Then evaluate, there are already solutions that are available for you. Each cloud service vendor or independent service vendor, they have solutions for observability built in. Evaluate if that can solve it first.
In
terms
Check,
of the
check,
reactive strategies that you were talking about and practices that you were talking about, one of the things that I felt is also one of the challenges for a data engineer is rolling back in case of a failure. So what are your thoughts on that?
Can you repeat it? Rolling back?
Rolling back. So for example, there is a failure in a pipeline, right? And
Correct.
you want to roll back to a safe state in
Correct.
that sense.
So typically, what we do have is, we have a failover based, backup database so the pipelines basically point to both of them, right? So even if that, one of them fails, the other one can take over and we can, start loading that. At least for us, the way it works is, if you want to roll back, we typically do a full load, right? That might be easier to do if your data volumes are lower, but if you have petabyte scale data volumes, that might be costly and time taking as well, right? So typically there can be, checkpoints that you can incorporate as a part of your pipeline. And again, that there is something called as code-based, checks, right? You can incorporate checks within your code itself if it's a custom-based solution, wherein it can trigger a message or an alert for you if some part of the code already fails, right? So maybe that can probably help you to do a fail-safe approach to go back and load from that specific time marker or checkpoint moving forward.
Right, because I think because of the larger data volumes, keeping backups and things like that, or having 2 copies of the data is more costly. And I think you're on point with the fact that keeping those single checkpoints would definitely be a much faster and more cost-efficient approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think out of all the costs, storage costs, at least based on my understanding, are the least, right? Compute costs are the more higher ones that you need to watch out for. So if you are able to at least put that backup in there, you can still have a strategy around archiving, letting go of the data, deleting it beyond a certain, you can pick up the data from, rather than going back to the source, for instance.
Thank you.
We have a question way at the end of the room.
I just wanted to ask you, what are the data cleansing techniques you used? And second question in the similar lines is, if there are any missing values, then what are the techniques you use to fill up the missing values and then continue your data so that you get quality data?
Yeah, so there are 2 aspects to that question, right? First thing, of course, is the missing values part. We don't do anything about it today. I told you, right? From a data quality standpoint, we don't do anything related to data quality. The data is as is how it comes into the system. So if there are missing values in a specific column, yes, there are missing values. It can be driven by the source system, or it can be driven by issues in the business process itself, right? So we do not handle missing values if as is, so we just pull the data as is. But what we definitely do is, if there are business context or business rules provided, for missing data or how to handle missing data, we make sure that we are incorporating it as a part of the pipeline. So it is purely driven by, how the business wants to look at the data. So we don't take that decision ourselves as the data and analytics team. We look for the business team to drive that. And that can be probably be a approach that might not always work, because if there is a new analyst or a new business owner, they might not even know if it is supposed to be a missing value or not, right? So I think that there is definitely room for improvement there. And what was your first question? Sorry, I missed out on that. One was about the missing values, and the first one was cleansing. Yeah, so there are cleansing techniques. So we typically look at typical cleansing techniques. We want to make sure that whatever columns or rows that are coming through, depending upon the kind of source that we have, whether it is an ERP, whether it's a CRM, marketing automation system, or IoT, for instance, right? So we typically look at business rules, talk to the business, but even beyond that, we use typical data cleaning techniques to make sure that if there is spaces in between, or if there are special characters, we clean them up. We try to typically move it to uppercase if it is okay with the business, to make sure that it is consistent in terms of the language and the data language that is used. So usual data cleaning techniques beyond, of course, the business rules that are defined.
Snehit, one last question from the audience before we move to Slido.
Yeah, sure.
Hi, Snehit.
Hi.
That was a wonderful presentation, actually.
Thanks.
I have a question that's more on see, with the seeming increase target is in cloud, how do you build the data pipeline?
So how do you build the data pipeline, or
Quality
how do you check for
pipeline,
data
I mean,
quality,
the-
right? So
yeah,
yeah, data quality again, software engineering practices, take over. Even if you have, a data engineering practice specifically for data, right? We also follow the software engineering practices. If you have to follow the software engineering practices. So we do have the typical, even if you work in an agile or a sprint model, right? We do have the dev, test, and prod environment. So any issues with regards to data quality, we typically detect within our dev and test environment as well. So irrespective of what the source is and where it is, right? Whether it is on-prem, whether it's a cloud-based Salesforce system, it can be, or an IoT-based solution, right? Or having data in S3. Once we pull it up using your data pipeline into your target can be an on-prem or a cloud data warehouse. We typically do the similar things that we were talking about, right? Count of rows, control totals. How do you make sure that is the data matching with the source? So we do all of that as part of the data migration from the source to the data warehouse. So that's to the extent that we do the checks. But beyond that, if there are scenarios where the business sees missing data, or we see missing data as a part of our unit testing practices, then we go ahead and fix that, because there can be many reasons why data quality can be bad, as I mentioned, right? It can be issues in the pipeline, it can be issues in the source system configurations, or it can be issues in the business process itself. So we then have that conversation on where to fix that. All right, thank you everyone. So you can find me.
A brilliant conversation. Mr. Snehat, there were also a lot more questions which came on Slido, unfortunately, due to time constraints. So if any of the queries, you all can kind of resolve that during lunch. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time and the knowledge share. Okay, so how's everyone doing? Let me hear your voices. Let's wake ourselves up again. Do you guys want to quickly just stand up and stretch? Let's just get the blood flowing one more time. Come on. If you all don't want to stand, I fully understand. Please remain seated. Let's do a quick hop in 3, 2, 1, hop. Come on, guys. Like really stretch. Yeah, 3, 2, 1, jump. Okay, 3, 2, 1, jump. Okay, awesome. Now, with your hands in the air, let's rotate those shoulders, both your hands. Let's see that. Let's do a small dance. All right. Now to wake up your vocal cords and your mind, everyone go, hoo ha. No, from your stomach. 3, 2, 1, hoo ha. Hoo ha. All right, amazing guys. One more jump. 3, 2, 1. And please remain seated. All right, calling upon stage, definitely one of my favorite person with the Unravel team. Now we're going to have a panel discussion that's going to happen on balancing cost and efficiency. Is data FinOps the answer to cloud cost governance? Our panel host for this session is Giriraj Bagdi. Come on guys, put your hands together for Mr. Giriraj here. He's the VP of Engineering Operations, a data and AI platform at Unravel Data, with extensive experience in leading engineering and operations teams for massive big data organizations. Giriraj is a result technologies. He brings a passion for empowering teams and building products that data ops team love. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, let's hear it for Mr. Giriraj. Come on.
Hello.
Quickly, can we get the mic 3 unmuted?
Hello. Is my voice clear? All right. We are super excited to host this panel. First of all, people in the back, humble request. Come in the front, guys. Come on. This panel, very exciting panel. Come in the front. All right? Perfect. I'm your panel host today afternoon, I guess, right? I would like to invite our first panelist, right? Our first panelist would be Prasanna Kumar. ML analytics platforms. Welcome, Shaurya. I love your hairstyle, Shaurya. All right. Our third panelist member is Sean. Sean is from US and he runs customer success teams in US and aligning customer goals, working with customers, making them happy, unhappy, all kind of fun stuff we do. Welcome, guys. All right. So today, I was in the morning, so now I was listening all the sessions. When we talk about cost, we do precise numbers, 28 times. It means the cost is so important topic, close to heart, right? So let's talk about this panel, what this panel is all about it. If I step back and think, many years back, people work into DevOps area. DevOps is more of managing application site, monitoring, data, and so on, right? With the transition, we came data ops, which is managing pipelines, how to monitor it. In the morning, you saw one of the slide from Shivnath, right? How the data pipelines get managed. It can get very expensive. How to monitor it. So gradually, data ops came into picture, right? Data ops about on-prem and cloud. So as workloads start going to cloud more and more, cost becomes very expensive, right? Costs was having a challenge across all cloud platforms. Came FinOps. FinOps is just a practice, a framework to manage cost effectively on the cloud. And what is data FinOps? Is managing the effectively in the cloud when data workloads are on the cloud. So today, panel is all about data FinOps and FinOps. That's a context. So far, so good, right? So with that, my first question would be to Shaurya. So Shaurya, I know in your organization, you're managing cost. Can you tell me what kind of challenges you are facing in your organization, business-wise, technical-wise, in managing the cost when workloads with the pipelines? How do you manage it?
So we're doing it in-house. We don't have like a product in place. But the way this started initially was we talked about in the morning, unit costs, right? So you look at your groups, your aggregates, your window functions, your joins, and say for per unit data, what is my cost with a Spark job versus a Flink thing versus just processing it on MSK and so on. So, and then you're able to say, all right, if I scale this up, here's my best case strategy. The good thing I kind of lucked into is that we have a brilliant team and management that kind of listens to us. So we could actually try multiple solutions, right? So we could say, for this one, we really don't need a Flink or a Spark. You know, just a regular Python thing could be, just dump it on a Lambda and use it, right? So we have been able to leverage the right solution in the right place. We were able to think beyond Java, which I think is a big handicap right now. I apologize if that's a hot take. But, you know, just thinking in Java enables you to think more about the structure of the code and less about what the code is actually doing. And we kind of got out of that, and now we can think about Rust, we can think about Python, we can think about all these new fun things that are coming up. And that helps us focus on what do we need to do on data and how much is it going to cost us. The one place we're still not able to get a handle on is when you're doing the modeling part. So
...26 years of experience in IT across the US, in Silicon Valley, New York, and then across India, in Bangalore and Pune and Delhi NCR. I worked with, in 2013 with MongoDB, touring all over India to, make sure that talking about evangelizing polyglot persistence using the right database for right job, right? If it is Oracle relational, then use Oracle. If it is non-relational, use maybe MongoDB, Cassandra, etc. So right price, etc. comes into those pictures. Right now I'm working with Wipro as lead data architect in our boldest, I would say offering, which is called Lab 45. With that, I'll come to the question. Would you like to just repeat what you just asked again?
My question was, what kind of organization challenges you see in managing the FinOps, in managing the data on the cloud?
Yeah. So when we are managing, data and FinOps on the cloud, first thing, which is less talked about is actually culture, right? So I was working for one of the largest fintech companies, with 2 data centers in the US, where 65,000 transactions were flowing, right? It is the largest, card provider. And when we started coming to cloud, so there what would happen, for example, I worked on providing Apache Kafka as a service to internal teams, right? And I would just order, 256 GB RAM and, 72 cores machine. And initially it will run, it will run very small workload. But at the end of 5 years, it will run everything, right? A lot of them. So the price is already amortized, right? The cost has been paid for. So the data engineers don't care what things they're running on it. As opposed to that, on the cloud, if I over provision, I pay more, right? So for example, if it is on AWS, if I go for EC4, then I pay more. But something which requires smaller thing, maybe I can do, EC.mx small. Why do that? So that kind of, building that kind of mindset into the engineers and the operators for choosing the right kind of resources is something which needs to come in from development to the operations, right?
Noted.
So that is one big thing, which is a big challenge, which I tackled when I went for the cloud migration. And, in addition to the tools, thankfully, things are very getting mature with companies like Excel Data and Unravel coming in. Otherwise, this is very, for data, it is not yet mature ecosystem. So I'm glad that community is there and there's so much interest, so many people, pat on the back for everybody, that, this will slowly become important and this will be better. But so far, I have seen a lot of challenges. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you. So Sean, this is a question for you. Sean, you have been working with customers worldwide, right? I'd like to hear from you, based on experience, what the customers are having similar kind of challenges in managing cost, being efficient, and the workload on the big data landscape.
Yeah, so the biggest problem is change of behavior. So what would fly on-prem?
Closer, can you get closer, Mike?
Dearly on the cloud. So for instance, you may have this one application may be running. It runs for 10 hours. But 5 of those 10 hours is spent waiting on a data load. So instead of splitting into 2 applications, they keep running that one in the cloud, not on right? So, and even if that's shown, my job to run, but yeah, you're cloud. Is it cloud suitable? Which cloud are you going to move it to, right? How much is it going to cost you if you move to it? So you have to have that ability to have some kind of migration assessment before you decide where you take it. Right?
Great. Yeah. So that goes to my follow-up question, right? And this is to Shaurya, you. Agree there are problems, right? My question, Shaurya, to you is, in your mindset, from the whole experience what you have in the industry, what are strategies, right, are you applying or we all should be applying to being efficient in the cloud? I mean, especially in the big data landscape.
Yeah, so one very interesting, there's a language problem. Interesting thing that I see and hear is people talking about costs and efficiency as if they're two opposite sides of a balance, which is not the case. You are efficient if you are cost effective. Like the definition of efficiency is kind of, it's not I need all my data processed immediately with 100% accuracy delivered yesterday. That's not efficiency. That's a fairy tale, right? So efficiency has to be that I have $100 and I was able to process as much as possible in that $100, right? So we, like I said, the unit cost, the unitary method really helps. But we do have slightly more interesting ways of doing it. So for example, the data quality discussion that we had in the last talk, we try to contextualize quality. You know, one quality is I'm able to ingest my data through my pipeline without any breaking of the pipeline. That's level one quality. So explore that data, do my analytics, do my dashboards, do my data modeling. And so we try to define the quality metrics so that, and so accordingly we can build automated remediations. This one's a critical pipeline, this one's not a critical. So we do a very like hybrid approaches are better ones.
Do you have FinOps practices in your organization, or is a path forward you're thinking some kind of FinOps practice you want to apply?
So we have a FinOps practice. We don't call it a FinOps practice. We call it cost optimization. What we do is we monitor cost every day and then review it once a week. And then week on week, we see where better understand the strategies and so on. So.
Thank you. Yeah. Prasun, the same questions goes to you. From experiences, strategies you think you're applying in an organization or you should be applying towards those FinOps practices for better cost management?
So, better management always starts with better observability, right? The cloud service providers, CSPs and hyper data, at a overview level. And did I say that they would also provide that in a batch mode? So they'll provide at the end of the billing cycle, right? So now that is not enough. So that's where, you need to do it real time, right? No longer batch mode is not enough. And number two, you need to do it basically at much more granular level. So the tagging, for example, which was talked about earlier, so you need to properly tag and tie it to the, business unit application, and then database, data pipeline, etc., all the way to compute and everything, and understand the cost at that level. And Shaurya was talking about the unit economics, so that is something which comes into picture. So once you have that kind of visibility, then you can proactively, then you can think about the solutions for that. And there are several automation and AI which can be used for that, right? And there are tools, etc., which help with that. Right? For example, there is something called spot instances, right? So compared to on-demand, spot instances are cheaper because if there is SLA is not that great, then you just go for spot instances and they'll run whenever unused compute is available. They'll just make use of it and do it and put the things on that, right? Then, for example, there are reserved instances, right? So reserved instances you have already paid for. So on-demand is when you go and ask. So reserved instances are again cheaper compared to on-demand. So don't go for on-demand, right? Go for other options according to the SLA. Obviously, if you need to respond back to the mobile application within, I would say 50 millisecond and everything, etc., then you can't use those, right? And Shaurya talked about the, Lambda. So Lambda was something, serverless architecture introduced by AWS. Similarly, we have Azure Functions and Google Functions. So use all of those because they, they don't require you to, have an application running all the time. So similarly, I would say use the right tool. I preach, I would say in my evangelism, use the right tool for the right job, right? So it's called polyglot system engineering, right? So the right database for the right job, right tool for the right job, etc. And involve business people. So there is business ops, there is product management, right? So product manager, they'll say, okay, and do it early on in the cycle. Don't do it as an afterthought, right? Our CFO says, oh, the bill has ballooned, so now I want to do it, right? No, right? You need to do it before. So, for example, product manager might, say that, okay, so here is like, 2 hours, and it is okay. Something else which needs to give results in like 500 milliseconds. So these are two different, and these two things can run on different instances, even though they do the same computation. But they don't need to run on EC2 itself, or they don't need to run on that, right? And last thing which I would say, since, data observability, for example, make use of the tiering, right? So there is hot, there is cold, and there is glacier, right? So hot is something where, the data that is needed right away, right? And then cold. So retire the data which you don't use that much. That is where, he was saying, unused licenses, unused data, etc. Keep a track of all that and properly assign it, And for example, Apache Kafka provides tiered storage. MongoDB, which I used to preach for 2-3 years in 2013, before it was that popular, and only use case being Aadhaar at the time. So there also they have, tiered storage. So make use of all those to optimize. So that's what I would say, long answer to what you asked me.
Thank you. Pretty helpful. Sean, you deal with a lot of customers. I repeat the same sentence, right? And when you come across customers, do they have kind of strategies to manage cost, or they don't have strategies? In your experiences, how does it work in the wide variety from customers from across the globe?
Yeah, so typically they don't have that strategy, because the biggest problem is that with the cloud, that central control goes away, right? Each business unit spins up their own. They can be in completely different platforms, right? So that control that used to be on-prem is kind of loosened, right? So now with that is that problem of, okay, who's doing what, where it's being done, how much is it costing? As Prasoon mentioned, you'll get a bill at the end of the month, but there's nothing showing you, even if it's a bill at the end of the month and it's skyrocketed, who did what, why? You don't have that. So what the tool would do is like kind of help you, give you that earlier warning. Sets maybe it's kind of a budgeting thing. You understand which groups will, by using maybe the tags, right, have a budget. Are you trending close to that budget? Are you going to blow that budget? Are you okay? Can you add additional workloads, right? So that's the kind of things that we have to then coach the customers even before they start their cloud journey. And if they're already on that journey, we say, hey guys, you may want to take a look at what you're doing right now. So that's one of our biggest challenges, to make sure customers understand what's going on. Because a lot of times they don't know, They may assume that it'll cost, X amount of money. Oh, it's a small job, it'll cost X amount of money. But when it goes to the cloud, it's not the same thing.
So, Sean, any strategies you apply, when we work with customers, any strategies you apply? Hey, you know what? These are best strategies, best practices. Quick summary, if you can outline.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the basic strategy is about early warnings, right? Understanding. It's all about understanding what's going on. It's as simple as that. Understanding what is being ran, because most of them don't know. They know they have these jobs on it. They don't know what it is. And on-prem, they didn't care, right? If we have a cluster, we could use it. It's meant to be used. In the cloud, is very different. You have to understand what's going on. You have to know how much it's going to cost me. You have to know, am I running on the most efficient way, as Prasoon mentioned, right? So the strategy is all about insight. No other way around it.
Thank you. Right. So, Shari, a question to you. You mentioned a few minutes back, if I'm hearing correctly, I'll repeat the words, that week after week, you spend time, right? And I think in my experience, week is pretty late. Somebody's running a job, it will blow up money, right? I come across in my previous gig, somebody blew up money and he was running for more than 12 hours. Just a test job, right? It's pretty late, right? So in your experiences, what kind of automation you are thinking, right? Don't come across those challenges. I'm sure you don't want to blow up money or Barnes and Nobles, right? Correct? In the cloud specifically, right? So what automation you are thinking in place or plan to put in place?
So we have two strategies. We already have sufficient automation that kind of keeps everything within predefined limits. But the other thing is, and this is a lesson borrowed from Richard Feynman, in his book he said, well, we were trying to build the atomic bomb, and people would just say, oh, ask these mathematicians to do this calculation, and it would take longer. And then Feynman said, look, that's my team. All I'll tell them is, do this calculation, and it's important because of the following reasons. And the troops knew where to shoot. So that, what we do is then we make sure that even the junior most engineers in the team are sensitive to what metrics we're tracking. Not everybody has access to the cost console, right? It's just hierarchy. I don't know why we have that, but you know, some engineer may say, oh, you spent $3 million on your cloud budget, and you didn't give me 30 rupees in my appraisals. So maybe that is the reason, but not everybody has. But not everybody has access to the cloud console. But you can have synthetic metrics that you can sort of make sure that even the juniors, most engineers can see and understand, look, if I have to operate, I operate within these parameters. And that's the definition of success or the definition of done. So we have this sort of two-pronged approach. We have automation when something goes awry, we break it. And then everybody understands why certain things are important. Yeah.
Thank you. Same question to Prasoon. You know, personally, I deal with a lot of challenges in my head. Actually, I get stressed out when costs blow up, right? And I have engineers in my team who directly look like a baby. You know, oh man, it's up or down, right? So, in your experiences, do you have similar challenges? I mean, sleepless nights or managing cost? If yes, any automation you are thinking or put in place in your organization to manage cost on the cloud, applying FinOps practices with respect to data?
Yeah. So I talk to a lot of customers because I come from the IT services background, right? So I talk to a lot of customers, and there is a lot of cost optimization people want to do, right? 2023 is being looked at as a year where a lot of repatriation from the cloud would happen, right? I mean, in 2006, when the first cloud service was introduced, does everyone know? 2006 was when the first cloud service was introduced, and it was S3, right? So to put everything on the cloud, you know, and people have been putting things on the cloud, and then some of them have realized the costs have not come down. I mean, a lot of it has happened that, you know, that the cost, whatever was the, you know, capex has gone into opex. Yeah. But then the total cost of ownership, in many cases, if it is not managed correctly, balloons up. And it can show up anywhere, right? It can show up, for example, it can show up in the data transfer costs, right? Which many people don't talk about. It's not just compute. It's not just that, you know, I want to look for the best EC2.mx large. Instead of mx large, I go for mx medium, right? That's not enough. We also need to look at data ops as, you know, so how much data is going egress, ingress. A lot of payment is because of that. You also need to think about multi-cloud strategy, right? So, so some of these things, you know, am I really optimal? That keeps me awake, right? Am I, you know, and that's what is keeping a lot of CFO and CXOs awake nowadays. You know, can I move some of it to maybe, for example, I'll give you. So, for example, you know, Cloudflare, right? But Amazon CDN charges much more, right? For example. But if you put it on Cloudflare, but then the data which goes from Amazon, you know, where we produce the website or GIF, etc., it will still be charged. And then from serving it, it won't be charged much, right? So all those kind of, I would say, strategy, and AI and automation plays a lot of role, still evolving, right? And it will take time, but we'll get there, you know.
Nice. Yeah. So Sean, it goes back to your same automation question, and I will rephrase the words a bit, Sean, for you. When you deal with a lot of customers, do they have automation plays, buy versus build? How does it all work out, right? Or they have a hack in place. You know, I'm going to put some hackathon over the weekend, and I optimize cost on the big data workloads. Any thoughts in that area?
Yeah, some have their own built automation, but what we do is help them understand that they can do this automation at various levels, right? I spoke about, you know, budgeting at maybe at a the application tag or a job level, or even at the entire corporate level, right? You may want different people get different notifications, right? Maybe the C levels may get, hey, this is the overall cost. A business unit get their costs at notification, hey, you're running close to what that budget could be, right? But all of this is kind of mute because that budget is already spent, right? That money's already spent. The biggest automation you need is at the individual application, the run level, right? Where that early warning, look, this job is costing you X amount of dollars right now. You may want to stop it. You may want to look at this right now. Or you can go to the point, as Shivna was mentioning about AI and looking at the trend of a job that ran before, right? You can say, hey, we know what this job cost before. Right now, there's an anomaly. That cost amount is being blown away. What is going on, right? So you want to make sure the automation starts at the lowest level before the bill's already gotten to pass the budget, and then there's nothing you can do but pay that and then learn for the next month. So you want to make sure that any automation you do is the lowest grain to avoid that higher level notifications.
Thank you, Sean. So this question for Prasanna. I have a question for you. How many times you get pressurized, or you are under pressure, or you get called, go and manage your cost, get the bill down. And if that comes right away, how do you act? What do you do?
Yeah. Definitely cost is, top of the concern for many CXOs. And, as a technologist, we get called a lot, right? As a lead data architect, we get called a lot. And that's what I do, right? So I'm like, okay, good. You're doing data ops. And when you're doing data ops, make sure that you build FinOps into it so that the big data does not turn into big bill, right? Okay. So when I get called in such instances, right, then there are certain, hand-grown tools which are there, right, which will analyze the workload and other things. So, a lot of it actually is, like handwritten Python tools, etc., that we have. Then a lot of companies, for example, I'm giving a preview. So a very large mobile manufacturing company, they're going to present in December. They get all the data from how the instances are running. They put it in like MySQL. And then from there, they have tags and everything. Because they're a very large customer for example, a hyperscaler, let's say AWS, right? Because it's going to present at AWS reInvent. I'm giving too much away. I'll get into trouble. But what they do, they get all the data. Then they put it into the facts and dimensions. They do the dimensioning based on the tags. So the nomenclature for the tags become very important because that will tell us which department, which job, etc. is doing that, right? So they do all that, and then because they are a very large customer of the hyperscaler, they have a special pricing. Then that special pricing is built into picture, and then they take a look at the bill, and then even Power BI can do it, and there the optimization takes place. So I give it back to them that here's the view. High finance person, here's the view where the money is going. Now you tell us which levers you can make. And then, that way, there is a big cross-group collaboration that I initiate, and that helps me get the cost down. And that's very satisfactory, actually. So it gives a lot of satisfaction.
So, Shaurya, I will rephrase a question for you, because you come from AI ML background, right? It may not be Barnes & Noble specific, right? But in your experiences, when workloads are expensive, high workloads, stage workloads, Spark workloads, and in the cloud is costly, right? It may be Databricks, EMR, GCP. What, in case the situations happen, what you will do, and what recommendation you think you'll be working on automation perspective or whatnot to manage costs effectively? Imagine you can't start a business. Business says, I need to run my workloads. But you're pressurized. You know what? Run the business. Get the cost down. What you will do?
So this is kind of business as usual pressures. Every day, somebody stays awake thinking there's too much money going down the drain when the data is getting processed. So observability, I think, becomes the primary thing. And let me take an example from way back when, right? I mean, this 2010, 2011. I'm required to architect a system that will bring the costs down from several hundred million to a to 700 million, right? So save 150 million. That was kind of the budget. And the first thing is you have to sensitize everybody that, look, you have to spend a little more in order to start saving. And the savings will become more and more over time, right? So you have to build an observability system, even if you have a product. Observability doesn't come automated, right? If you're, let's say you're just gathering server logs from everywhere, right? And I say, hey, we're using MSK, Managed Services for Kafka, versus I have an EC2 cluster that runs Apache Pulsar. And I'm giving you server logs from both. How will you actually figure something out, right? So there has to be a human aspect to it. And then it boils down to basically running this as FinOps, as a separate engineering practice, in addition to writing our code, in addition to writing our unit tests, in addition to writing our deployment code. That whole T model, will pay you the same money, but will ask you to do back-end, front-end, and database. Let's add the cost management part or observability part. So we like over time, through painful experience, I've learned that we should also be publishing to the logs some of the metrics that will impact the cost. For example, how much time did a particular computation take? And then we do build CloudWatch alerts that notify, hey, this is going kind of out of your bounds. Look at it. And I can notify either the stakeholders or the other leadership or business functions, say this might go south, but bear with me, we'll fix it. Right? So we have small bumps in the road, but we don't get into a catastrophic situation here.
So Sean, I will rephrase this question for you. Yep. When you deal with customers reach out to you, help me reduce the cost. My high workloads, Spark workloads, help me. I'm sure you hear this n number of times. Generally, how you advise? What's our recommendation practice you go forward?
Yeah. So the first thing we do there is we start to look. Yeah. Sorry. We
finish up. You have 2 minutes. We have time.
Yeah. I need 1 minute. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. The first thing we do is take a look at what are the largest running, most repeated applications running, because you don't want to have a customer focus on a job that ran once or twice, right? You want something that's repeatable, that's running over and over again. See what are the top X of those, and then within those, look to see what kind of tuning you can do to them. If it's a DBX, you can use smaller instances. If it's EMR, you can just tweak an application configuration, right? And then that will help, right? But the biggest thing is human behavior. So what we advise customers created the Hall of Shame, Hall of Fame kind of concept. Right? Everyone wants to be in the Hall of Fame. No one wants to be in the Hall of Shame. So, but you don't want to put someone in the Hall of Shame because they spend the most money. But if you can show that they may have spent the most money, but they had the most amount of recommendations to change, and they were not heeded, then you can say, hey, So that's what we do.
So, in audience, I have a big question for everyone, and please listen to my question. How many of you get pressurized, or come under the pressure, or are being forced? Please manage cost. Do something about it. Either you manage your workloads, or you tune your jobs, or you shut down your instances. How many of you get under that pressure? Can you raise your hands? Shout a bit, guys. It's many of you, right? Right. So yes. All right. Thank you so much. Big round of applause for our panelists. Right. Open for questions for any of the panelists.
Yeah, so I guess we have time for 2 questions.
And by the way, we ate 39 times plus cost in this panel.
Anybody out here would like to quickly? Yeah, we have a gentleman there. Can we get a microphone to him?
Good afternoon. Myself, Hari Krishna. So when we are talking about the cost, reduction of cost, as a DBA manager, I have seen multiple times to the servers, crunch up the CPU, or they create the problem. They are the cost-killing resources. So I want to know how Unravel product or you come out of this situation when we install on our servers.
So let me just understand the question better. You're saying that as a DBA, you have third parties managing the infrastructures or some part of the project, consumers.
Third-party tools, yeah.
Are doing the reverse for this system, right? But have a quota for them on this system as well as whatever the new system that you architect. So that you need to do everybody, and every data systems, whether it is Apache Kafka as a service, whether it is RDBMS, whether it is MongoDB as a service, Cassandra as a service, for everywhere you need to do that, right? So I would say quota, budgeting, forecasting, and tenant management. So that's what would help. Did I get you right, or?
I get you, but if it is at database level, then we can do. But it is at OS level, at a Unix level, or AX level, or server level.
Maybe we'll discuss. Yeah. Okay, sure. We'll discuss during the breaks. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, folks. Between lunch and us panel, we are standing. And back to the MC.
Yes. Can we hear it for all the wonderful panel members out here? I really saw everyone paying utmost attention and maximum gratitude to everyone here, Mr. Prasoon, Mr. Shaure, Mr. Sean, and Mr. Giriraj. Thank you so much for joining us. Everybody, a quick update now is the time most of us have been waiting for. It's time for lunch. So just before you access lunch, I need to tell you guys that you'll need to pull out your coupon, hand it over, pick up a plate, and enjoy the meal. In the meantime, do you guys remember there was a quiz that happened earlier today? We have the winners of those quiz, Mr. Dayananda and Dayananda, where are you? Look at that man. Give him a round of applause. Yeah, he just stood up like, bro, I'm a backbencher, but I did it. And Ashish S. Ram. Mr. Ashish. All right, good job, guys. You all are the winners of the first quiz that took place. Right now, again, we're going to have the second quiz. There are totally 3, so Dayananda and Ashish, you all can take part, but if you all win, I can't give you all double credit. So everyone do engage. There were 45 participants in the previous quiz. Let's go all out. And everyone who's online as well, unfortunately, you're not here with us because you thought you can watch it online and you got lazy. You can't win prizes. But here's the opportunity for all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, you all can please move forward to your lunch destination. We're going to kickstart. We'll jump to the next discussion. Yeah, see, everyone's like slowly stretching out. No, bro. Okay, good job, guys. Please put as data enthusiasts, so make the maximum utilization of the time spent here. Once again, this is Sunil Suresh. I'm going to be putting some background music while you enjoy your lunch.